There is no team in the NBA or even sports in general that is perfect at drafting players. Every year there'll be a team that will pass on a future superstar for inevitable bust that they were very high on in the pre-draft process.
The Sacramento Kings select Marvin Bagley III.
So what is going on, everybody? How is everybody doing today? We are going to be going through every NBA team's biggest draft width since 2010. So for most of these, this is going to be a player that they took with a much better option going within the next 5 picks. And we'll have some trades in this as well, when a player could have just kept a future superstar but ended up making a draft night trade for a worser player. If you guys do enjoy this style of content, I would appreciate you dropping a thumbs up. So we're going to start things off with the Toronto Raptors, who have actually been a pretty good drafting team in the 2010s. And some of their bad picks like DeLon Wright, Bruno Caboclo, and even Terrence Ross, 8th overall in 2012, really weren't followed by any players that you would have regret not taking. So I'm going to talk about their 29th overall pick in the 2020 draft. That was Malachi Flynn, in which who they selected 1 pick ahead of Desmond Bane. Flynn just ended up getting traded in the OG Anunoby trade to the New York Knicks. He ended his Raptors career averaging 5.4 points, 37% field goal percentage in 175 games, while Desmond Bane for the Memphis Grizzlies, a pick later, just got a rookie max extension, and he's averaging 24.5 points this season for the Grizzlies and is one of the better 3-point shooters in the league. For the Brooklyn Nets, we are going all the way back to 2010. In a draft, they thought they were going to get the #1 overall pick to land John Wall. Instead, they ended up with the 3rd overall pick. They took a big man out of Georgia Tech by the name of Derek Favors. Now, Favors was later eventually involved in a Darren Williams trade, but somebody that went 2 picks later that they could have taken was one of the best centers in the league for a 5-year stretch, and that was DeMarcus Cousins, who fell to the Kings at 5. Cousins ended up averaging 21 points and 11 rebounds over 7 years with the Kings, and who knows how that Nets rebuild would have been if they landed the star-studded big man out of Kentucky. Since 2010, the New York Knicks have been a very good team at drafting outside of the lottery. In 2010, they took Landry Fields 39th overall, Iman Shumpert in 2011 17th overall, Tim Hardaway Jr. 24th overall in 2013, and recently taken Mitchell Robinson in the 2nd round, and getting Emmanuel Quickley and Quentin Grimes late in the draft. So we're going to go to the 2018 NBA draft, in which they took Kevin Knox 9th overall out of Kentucky. Knox ended up playing 4 years with the Knicks and shot 36% from the field. And a player that went 2 picks later was Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who is now an MVP candidate in his 6th year in the NBA. We all know that the Celtics made a phenomenal trade in the 2010s, which later ended up being draft picks from the Brooklyn Nets that ended up being Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. They've had some great draft picks like Marcus Smart, Terry Rozier, Avery Bradley as well. But you know what? We mentioned him earlier. In the 2020 draft, the Celtics had the 30th pick originally, and that ended up being Desmond Bane to Memphis. Well, they traded that pick. Imagine you had Desmond Bane alongside Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum right now. That would be absolute insanity on the offensive side of the ball with that optimal floor spacing. And this was pretty much a salary dump for Boston just to get off of the Enes Kanter contract. Oh man, the Philadelphia 76ers had a really bad 2010 stretch with the trust the process era. I mean, they had plenty of #1 overall picks like Markelle Fultz and Ben Simmons. And I'm not going to knock them for the Markelle Fultz trade up just because we didn't really know about Markelle Fultz's injury. And on draft night, he was definitely the consensus #1 pick. So we're going to talk about what they did in the 2018 draft when they traded away pick number 10, which ended up being Mikal Bridges, to the Phoenix Suns for a future Miami 1st round pick that they used in the Tobias Harris trade, and for Zaire Smith, who went 14th overall. Zaire Smith ended up playing 13 total games for the 76ers, averaging 3.7 points, while a few years later, Mikal Bridges headlined a Kevin Durant trade package return, and it made no sense. Mikal Bridges' mom literally worked for the Philadelphia 76ers. He went to school in Philly at Villanova. He's from Philadelphia. So yeah, I don't know what the Sixers were thinking in 2018. Back in 2011, you had the 15th overall pick on the board, and the Indiana Pacers selected Kawhi Leonard. But wait, no, they traded away that pick in exchange for George Hill. They also gave up Davis Bertans in that trade as well, which is kind of funny looking back on. But yeah, the Indiana Pacers drafted Paul George in 2010. They could have paired him up with Kawhi Leonard in 2011. And who knows, that Indiana Pacers team with Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, Lance Stevenson, Roy Hibbert, and David West could have dethroned the Miami Heatles in the Eastern Conference and could have won multiple rings together. I have no idea what the Milwaukee Bucks were thinking in 2016. They really bought into the Thon Maker hype when they selected him 10th overall. They definitely made up for it, taking eventual Rookie of the Year Malcolm Brogdon 36th overall. But with taking Giannis in 2013 and Jabari Parker in 2014, the Milwaukee Bucks ended up passing on Domantas Sabonis, who went 1 pick later to the Orlando Magic. Maker ended up playing in 166 games across 3 seasons with the Milwaukee Bucks, and he averaged 4.5 points and 2.5 rebounds a night, while the selection Domantas Sabonis 1 pick later ended up being a 3-time All-Star, a 2023 All-NBA member, and one of the best big men today in 2024. In 2014, the Chicago Bulls loved this sharpshooter wing out of Creighton and Doug McDermott, and they made a trade with Denver to select him 11th overall and gave up the eventual picks that were Gary Harris Harris and Yusuf Nurkic. Obviously, the Bulls had a huge draft blunder before 2010 when they ended up trading away the rights to LaMarcus Aldridge. Doug McDermott played in 3 years with Chicago. In 161 games, he averaged 8 points and shot 44% from the field. And when you look at the rest of these draft whips in this video, this one definitely looks like the best compared to the other ones that are going to be really, really bad. All right, so for the Cleveland Cavaliers, you could talk about what they did in 2013, selecting Anthony Bennett first overall, but we're going to go 1 year prior to that in 2012 when they selected Dion Waiters 4th overall out of Syracuse. This was 1 pick after Bradley Beal went to the Washington Wizards, and the Cavs just for some reason really wanted a shooting guard and was going to take one no matter what. Well, 2 picks later was a smaller guard out of a smaller school in Weber State, Damian Lillard, who went 6th overall to Portland. Waiters' time in Cleveland was not very good. There was a ton of off-the-court issues involving him on a plane. He was an inefficient one-way NBA player that just didn't really work out in Cleveland. And imagine we got to see Damian Lillard paired up with Kyrie Irving in Cleveland, and they could have still signed LeBron James a few years later. And I feel like a big three of Dame, Kyrie, and LeBron would have won more than 1 championship together. The 2010s weren't a bad decade for the Detroit Pistons. It wasn't great though. And honestly, a lot of their draft whips like Henry Ellison, Stanley Johnson, Brandon Knight, and Sekou Doumbouya really weren't followed by any big name players. But in 2017, they took Luke Kennard, 1 pick ahead of eventual All-NBA caliber shooting guard in Donovan Mitchell. Kennard played in 3 seasons with the Pistons, averaging under 10 points a night, while Donovan Mitchell is a 4-time All-Star in 2024 and is definitely going to get his 5th this year. In 2020, the Miami Heat selected a big man out of Memphis by the name of Precious Achiuwa. He ended up only playing 1 season in Miami before getting shipped off to Toronto in a Kyle Lowry sign and trade. And the pick that went after Precious ended up being Tyrese Maxey, who was the front runner in the 23-24 season for most improved player. It looks like he's going to be an all-star, averaging 26 points, 6.5 assists, and shooting 38% from 3 in year 4. And imagine they had Tyrese Maxey with Tyler Hero, Bam Adebayo, and Jimmy Butler. That could have been a future dynasty for years to come. The Atlanta Hawks weren't the worst drafting team by any means in 2010, and they ended up with a good player in this trade, but I have to talk about them trading away the rights to Luka Doncic during the 2018 draft. I know they ended up with Trae Young. I know they ended up going to a conference finals appearance before Luka ever made one himself, but they traded away a first ballot Hall of Famer, probably a potential multiple MVP guy, and somebody that is going to be top 5 in the NBA for the next decade to take Trae Young and Cam Reddish. You guys can let me know if this isn't the biggest draft whip from the Atlanta Hawks in the comments below, but trading away a generational talent will always end up on one of these lists in my opinion. The Wizards were a team throughout the 2010s that really didn't have many draft picks either. I feel like they always tried trading them away to try to add to the duo of Bradley Beal and John Wall. In 2011, they took Jan Vesely 6th overall, but I'm not going to knock them for passing up on Kemba Walker, Brandon Knight, Bismack Biyombo, and Jimmer Fredette, who were the following 4 picks. And they also had John Wall at the time, who was the #1 overall pick in 2010. So we're going to talk about them selecting Corey Kispert 15th overall in the 2021 NBA draft when Alperen Sengun was 1 pick later. I feel like Kispert should have went to a team that was later in the draft, that was more in a win now mode, just because he could be a sharpshooter off the bench, especially in playoff games. And it seemed like the Wizards were going to be an inevitable rebuild team when they finally traded away Bradley Beal and Kristaps Porzingis a year later. And imagine this Wizards team in a rebuild centered around Alperen Sengun. They would look so much brighter as a team's future over the next couple of seasons if they made this draft change on draft night in 2021. So for the Charlotte Hornets and Bobcats, it could be a plethora of draft whips since 2010. You can go back to 2012 when they selected Michael Kidd-Gilchrist 2nd overall, and then you had guys like Bradley Beal and Damian Lillard be a couple picks later. In 2015, they took Frank Kaminsky when Devin Booker went a couple picks later. Man, poor Kemba Walker. The Hornets did just such a bad job trying to build around him through the draft. But we're going to go with what happened on draft night in 2018 when they had the rights to draft Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, but instead they traded away that pick in exchange for a pick later and a future 2nd rounder. So they ended up with Miles Bridges instead of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander when they could have just drafted Shai and actually have started their rebuild at the proper time there and moved on from Kemba Walker while his value was the highest. But instead they took Miles Bridges, who has just had a plethora of issues, obviously mainly off the court, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is an MVP candidate in the 2024 season. For the Orlando Magic, they didn't have too many bad draft whips. Like some of their worst picks in the 2010s and early 2020s really weren't followed by any studs. So you could go with what happened in 2017 when they took Jonathan Isaac, 1 pick before Valerie Markkanen, but I won't knock that too much for them just because of Jonathan Isaac's injury concerns over the next couple of seasons. That's really out of their control. So I'm going to go with what they did in a 2018 loaded draft when they selected Mo Bamba 6th overall, and you had guys like Colin Sexton, Wendell Carter Jr., Mikal Mikal Bridges and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander follow up that Mo Bamba pick, which just in hindsight did not look like a great selection. So we all know that a way to spice up watching the NBA can be to combine it with fantasy sports. So today's video is brought to you by the easiest place to play fantasy sports this NBA season, Underdog Fantasy. So I'm proud to partner with Underdog Fantasy Sports this NBA season. It's my favorite place to play fantasy games. My favorite part about Underdog is the pick'em, where it's super easy to play. You just pick 2 to 5 stats of your favorite players or a game that you're watching or going to that night and choose whether they can go higher or lower. I've had some success so far this NBA season doing a 5 picks for $400, which included the Charlotte Hornets and the Washington Wizards with players like LaMelo Ball, Jordan Poole, Tyus Jones, Denny Avdia, and Daniel Gafford. Also had another fun one as well that involved Giannis Antetokounmpo, DeMar DeRozan, and Zach LaVine. And if you get all your picks right, you can make up to 20 times your money on a single game. You can also make rivals picks as well, which pits 2 players against each other. Which player would have more points, assists, rebounds, etc. So what are you waiting for? Sign up at UnderdogFantasy.com or via the App Store and use my promo code SROS. You can see it on your screen now. And you will receive a 100% deposit match up to $100 when you use my code when you sign up. You will also receive a new customer special, aka a mystery pick'em special, which will get you a pick'em special in your lobby as soon as you create an account using code SROS. And you must be of age in certain states as well. You can see if Underdog is available in your states in the description below. And please remember to play responsibly. Remember to use code SROS at sign up, and thank you to Underdog again for sponsoring today's video. The 2010s were not kind to the Sacramento Kings on draft night. They had maybe the worst stretch ever with top 10 overall picks after they selected DeMarcus Cousins in 2010. Basically in 2011 they took Jimmer Fredette, 2012 Thomas Robinson, and we know Damian Lillard went right after Robinson. 2013 Ben McLemore 7th overall, Nick Stauskas 8th overall in 2014, Willie Cauley-Stein 6th overall in 2015. Thank God they took De'Aaron Fox in 2017 5th overall to end that streak. But you know what? They went right back to their old ways in 2018 when they selected Marvin Bagley over Luka Doncic. Yeah, this is maybe the worst draft whiff in this video. They could have paired up De'Aaron Fox with Luka Doncic. Bagley ended up playing 3.5 seasons in Sacramento before getting traded to Detroit. He was constantly injured in Sacramento. It seems like his family also just came out with rumor after rumor that Bagley needed to get traded. And all this happened because the Sacramento Kings front office did not get along with Luka Doncic's family. Wild. It's still crazy that they made this draft with even a few years later, and I'm sorry Kings fans to bring this up. Between the Lob City Clips and acquiring Paul George and Kawhi Leonard in 2019, the Clippers were never picking too high in the NBA draft. They did take Al-Farouq Aminu a couple picks higher than Paul George and Gordon Hayward in the 2010 draft, but we're going to talk about one a little bit more recent during the 2019 NBA draft when they ended up trading for Mfiondu Kabengele, 27th overall with the Brooklyn Nets, and the following picks were Jordan Poole, Keldon Johnson, Kevin Porter Jr., and Nick Claxton. So yeah, imagine adding a nice scoring wing like a Poole or a Johnson to Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, or a team that's desperately needed some big man help since they acquired those 2 future Hall of Famers and they could have taken Nick Claxton. So in my opinion, an underrated draft whiff in the LA Clippers franchise history. The Lakers had a ton of top 10 picks within the last 15 years. Heck, even taking Jalen Hood-Schifino over Cam Whitmore and Jaime Jaquez doesn't look great so far. They also traded out the rights to select Jaden McDaniels in the 2020 draft. But we're going to talk about what they did in 2017 when they selected Lonzo Ball 1 pick ahead of Jason Tatum. Lonzo Ball was a super fun player out of UCLA, and you couldn't predict his future injuries at all. And it looks like he was really turning his career around in New Orleans and Chicago. But Lonzo ended up playing in just 2 years with the Lakers before being involved in the Anthony Davis trade. And Jason Tatum is one of the best players in the NBA and is on his way to being a first ballot Hall of Famer. And they definitely could have included Kyle Kuzma in that Anthony Davis trade instead of Lonzo Ball and still would have gotten it done. They definitely could have held on to Jason Tatum. Okay, the Phoenix Suns were one of the worst drafting teams up there with the Sacramento Kings in the 2010s. They have so many draft whiffs. In 2012, they took Kendall Marshall 13th overall. In 2013, they took Alex Len 5th overall. They hit it out of the park with Devin Booker 13th overall in 2015, but they went back to their old ways, selecting Dragon Bender 4th overall in 2016. But the worst one, in my opinion, has to be taking Josh Jackson over De'Aaron Fox in 2017. You could also throw in taking Aiden over Luka in the 2018 draft. But the fact that Phoenix needed a point guard so badly to pair up with Devin Booker long term, and they had the perfect player on the board, they would have been Kentucky backcourt teammates. But no, they ended up going with the below average defender, an inefficient scorer in Josh Jackson out of Kansas. Jackson had plenty of off the court issues as well. He only played 2 years in Phoenix, averaging 12 points and 4.5 rebounds while shooting 41% from the field and 29% from 3. We obviously know that the Warriors have been one of the better teams in the league over the last 15 years, and they've made some nice draft picks as well, like most recently Brandon Podziemski 19th overall, Kuminga 7th overall in 2021, Moody at 14th, 2014. But yeah, selecting James Wiseman 2nd overall in the 2020 draft has not looked great. So obviously LaMelo Ball was the pick right after that, but in the NBA, you take best player available no matter what. We all know that the Warriors needed a center, and that's why they ended up taking Wiseman over LaMelo Ball. But in my opinion, you were always going to take the better player. I liked LaMelo over Wiseman during that pre-draft process as well. I thought Golden State should 100% take whoever doesn't go number 1 between Ant and LaMelo. Wiseman ended up playing just 1.5 years in Golden State, averaging 9.9 points in 60 total games. Injury issues, lack of involvement in the offensive sets, and his inability to buy on the defensive side of the floor really didn't make Wiseman and Golden State long-term partners together. And LaMelo Ball is one of the better young point guards under the age of 23 in the league. They could have leveraged LaMelo Ball in a trade later on to get an even better center, but hey, at least Golden State won the 2022 finals, even though Wiseman was hurt that whole season. All right, we already talked about a team whiffing on DeMarcus Cousins in this video like the New Jersey Nets did in 2010. Well, we're going to talk about the team that picked 4th overall, 1 pick ahead of the Cousins selection, in the Minnesota Timberwolves selecting Wesley Johnson 4th overall. Obviously, 1 year prior in the 2009 draft, they did one of the worst draft misevaluations in NBA history, selecting 2 point guards over Steph Curry. But we're only going back to the 2010 draft here, and they took Wesley Johnson, who ended up playing just 2 seasons with the Minnesota Timberwolves, averaging 7.7 points and shot 39% from the field, while, like I said before, DeMarcus Cousins ended up being one of the best big men in the NBA. The Timberwolves are low-key one of the worst drafting teams of the last 15 years as well, up there with Sacramento and Phoenix. The Denver Nuggets made one of the best draft selections in NBA history in 2014, selecting Nikola Jokic in the 2nd round. But did you know they had the 13th overall pick on draft night in 2017? They ended up trading away that pick for Tyler Lydon, shout out Syracuse, and Trey Lyles. But the player that they traded with Utah that was eventually selected by the Jazz was Donovan Mitchell. Yeah, we could have saw a Jamal Murray, Donovan Mitchell backcourt with Nikola Jokic there at the 5. Obviously, it was fine for the Denver Nuggets. They ended up winning the 2023 championship. They did a great job in the 2018 draft to select Michael Porter Jr. 14th overall. But yeah, how dope would it have been to watch a Jamal Murray and Mitchell backcourt? The OKC Thunder have been actually a pretty good drafting team as well over the last 15 years. But during the 2017 draft, they selected Terrence Ferguson 21st overall. Ferguson ended up playing in 3 years with the Thunder and averaged 4.8 points a night and shot 40% from the field. And the following picks after Terrence Ferguson ended up being Jared Allen by the Brooklyn Nets at 22 and OG Anunoby by the Toronto Raptors at 23. Yeah, not a great job by OKC there in 2017. Okay, we've talked about a couple teams either passing up on Donovan Mitchell or trading away that pick in the 2017 draft. Well, another team that could have maybe saved the chance that their franchise player could have won a championship in Portland were the Trailblazers in 2017 when they ended up selecting Zach Collins 10th overall, which they traded up with the Sacramento Kings to select 3 picks ahead of Donovan Mitchell. Yeah, imagine they ended up moving on from CJ McCollum for maybe a more defensive-minded big or forward, and they had a Donovan Mitchell and Damian Lillard backcourt. We could have maybe finally seen a Portland Trailblazers team in the championship, and Damian Lillard would have played with the Portland Trailblazers for his whole career. So the Utah Jazz have done a phenomenal job trading for guys on draft night, like Donovan Mitchell in 2017 and Rudy Gobert back in 2013. But in 2015, they selected one Kentucky player over another when they selected Trey Lyles 12th overall, who ended up just playing 2 years in Utah, who averaged 6 points, 3.5 rebounds a night in around 17 minutes per game, shot 40% from the field. And the pick right after Lyles in 2015 was Devin Booker, who was drafted by the Suns 13th overall. Obviously, we know that Devin Booker was the best player on the Suns Western Conference Championship team in 2022 and is a multiple-time All-Star and the best shooting guard in the NBA today. The Mavericks over the last 15 years have been trying to compete mostly every year, and in 2020 they already had Luka Doncic, and they were looking to draft some players in the middle of the draft at 18 to pair up with Luka. They took Josh Green out of Arizona, who's been a fine player for them. He's definitely taken a step back during the 2024 season after a really strong year 3 last year. Ended up getting an extension from the Mavericks too back in October, but somebody that went 3 picks later, we've already talked about it in this video, and that was Tyrese Maxey. Like I said before, Maxey's the front runner to win Most Improved this year, is averaging 26 points and 6 assists a night, and could have been even more lethal next to Luka Doncic in Dallas. Throughout most of the 2010s, the Houston Rockets were pretty good with James Harden. They weren't the best drafting team in the world, but definitely not the worst. But it looks like in 2021, they definitely regret selecting Jalen Green ahead of Evan Mobley and Scotty Barnes. I don't want to dunk on Jalen Green too much because he inherited a terrible environment there in Houston that was basically a glorified AAU team, but his efficiency has never really taken that step with the Rockets, and I'm sure they'd much rather have Evan Mobley's Defensive Player of the Year caliber defense next to Alperen Sengun in that front court, or Scotty Barnes' well-balanced, complete game instead of Jalen Green. Obviously, the San Antonio Spurs have been a phenomenal drafting team over the last 15 years, landing DeJounte Murray 29th overall in 2016, Derek White 29th overall in 2017, and Keldon Johnson 29th overall in 2019. They made a really dumb pick though in 2021 when they selected Joshua Primo in the lottery 12th overall, but we're gonna go back to 2011 when they also had the 29th overall pick, but they whiffed on this one. They took Corey Joseph, who ended up being a fine player for San Antonio. Played 4 seasons with the San Antonio Spurs, even ended up helping them get a ring in the 2014 season as a backup guard, but the pick after them, 30th overall in the 2011 NBA draft, was Jimmy Butler. So yeah, the Spurs really had a great opportunity to end up with Kawhi Leonard and Jimmy Butler in the 2011 NBA draft. That would have been like the most amazing two-way forward duo in the 21st century. Throughout the mid-2010s, the Memphis Grizzlies had some horrible first-round picks, like Xavier Henry in 2010, Jordan Adams in 2014, Jarrell Martin in 2015, Wade Baldwin in 2017, which were all just not great. We're going to zone in on 2014 when they selected Jordan Adams 22nd overall. He was out of UCLA. He ended up playing in just 32 games in his NBA career and averaged 3.2 points a night. And somebody that went 3 picks later was Clint Capella, who obviously would have been a nice big man for the Memphis Grizzlies, who were still trying to win it all with Marc Gasol and Mike Conley. They were very lucky though, as most of their bad picks weren't really followed by any eventual superstars. And finally, for this video, we're going to talk about the New Orleans Pelicans, kind of similar to the Memphis Grizzlies, where they didn't really pass up on too many future all-stars or superstars. So we're really just going to talk about what they did in 2020 when they selected Kyra Lewis over guys like Aaron Nesmith, Cole Anthony, and Isaiah Stewart. Yeah, really not terrible draft whiffs at all. You could go back to 2016 when they selected Buddy Hield over Jamal Murray. I don't really think that's that bad though, because no matter who they took there in 2016 was going to be in that DeMarcus Cousins trade. So yeah, that is going to be it for the video. I hope you guys did enjoy. Let me know if you agree or disagree with my picks for each team's biggest draft whiff since the 2010 draft. I love you guys like always, and I'll catch you all on the next one. Peace.